Welcome to the College Knowledge Podcast, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. Whether you're searching for that right fit college, applying to college, or figuring out how you're going to afford it all, you're in the right place. You'll hear from deans, admissions counselors, student athletes, and scholars from esteemed universities and colleges around the country. We'll dig deep to uncover their insight and unique experiences. So whether you're a student gearing up for college or a parent with college-bound kids, sit back, relax, and listen. Like you, we have lots of questions. Our guests have the answers, and we're excited to share them with you. Let's get started. Thank you guys for being a part of College Knowledge, powered by Elite Collegiate Planning. If you didn't know, we have a free crash course on college funding at elitecollegiateplanning.com. This will explain different types of loans, types of financial aid, savings vehicles, and much more. And remember, plan early and pay less. All right. Hello. Welcome back, everybody, to College Knowledge. I'm your host, Dave Kozak, alongside my co-host, Mr. Joe Kearns. Top of the afternoon, Joe. Yeah. Morning, whatever day, whatever time it is. Today, we have the distinguished pleasure of interviewing and introducing Mr. Bill Priestley. Bill, you run an operation called the Dream Job Factory, and it's a conversation I can't wait to get into. But first of all, welcome to the show. Appreciate having you and you doing this for us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to look forward. I've been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks.
Good deal.
So,
love it.
Yeah.
So I always like to start, give the audience a little bit of background. Obviously, your passion is kind of the dream job and the mentality of the dream job. So there's a psychology behind it, but there's also a process to getting to that. How did you get into this? You know, you've got a history here that I think is interesting and fascinating at the same time, but give us a little background.
So on the Dream Job Factory front, so my dream job idea for many years, which started in college, was to become an NCAA Division I sportscaster. And it took me 18 years to achieve that, mostly because of my own fault. I made a lot of mistakes in that particular journey. In fact, when I made that position, we actually hired someone a year out of college that basically did the same thing I did. So he did in 1 year what it took me 18 years to do. But along the way, I decided that I wanted to, if I didn't make my dream job, I wanted to be able to help other people figure out theirs. And so that kind of got started. I was, when you're in broadcasting, 99 times out of 100, that won't pay the bills. So you got to do something else. And a couple of years, I was teaching at a small school in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and really got the bug to start it there. And eventually through that, I found out about a graduate assistantship for broadcasting at Campbell University, which is in North Carolina, and applied for that job and got it. And as you're a GA, you have to get a master's degree as a graduate assistant. So I got my master's degree in education based around this idea of the psychology of how to help young people use their education to get to where they want to go in life. And that's kind of where it started. I did my GA for 2.5 years. When you graduate, you're supposed to quit because you're no longer a GA. And I went looking for a teaching job at that particular point. And the school that I was at, Campbell, a few months after I left, said, "Hey, Bill, we're turning your old position into a full-time gig. Do you want to come back?" And that's how I got the job, to be a sportscaster there as well. So I did that for 5 years, drank very deeply in that experience, loved it. Unfortunately, got laid off after 5 years due to budget cuts, which happens a lot in broadcasting. It's not an industry of any kind of solidity when it comes to or permanence. Let's put it that way. And then decided, all right, let's see what we can do with this and try and move it on as a side hustle and then a full-time gig. So that's kind of the backstory of me and how this idea came to fruition.
Fantastic. And I want to, Joe, we've interviewed tons of people, and there's always a vision at some point that comes to someone. And in this case, and I think this dovetails into the conversation about what you're meant to do, what you want to do, what is that dream job, and how do you get there? But the reality to me is knowing in the back of your brain, here's this passion, here's this thing, broadcasting, and also the idea of finding the dream job. And the struggle to get the dream job leads to, hey, if I'm not the only one in the world struggling with this, I know there's other people. So, hey, if I can take my two passions and work it together, create a business out of it, that's for another podcast called Paradigm Playbook, which is about it's about entrepreneurship and the struggle of entrepreneurialism, and how to be successful in it. But so in the dream job scenario, like how do you start? And obviously our perspective is coming from high school to college to the next, right? And I've talked to psychologists and we've talked to other deans and provosts and all along the way where it seems that there's this pattern in our country to, you got to go to engineering school or you got to go to this, and you're kind of fed into this system because, hey, you're good at math, so this is what you should do. And a lot of people come out, they get that first job, they end up in a cubicle, they hate what they're doing, they don't want to do it anymore, and they realize that all of their hard skills are in a area that they don't want to participate in. And our focus on the college planning side is obviously to help people make that choice earlier so that you're at least getting the hard and soft skills necessary to pursue whatever the career is. So where do you start in the process when you're trying to establish what is that dream job?
Wow, that's not a small question at all.
No, it's not.
You can do the beauty of this particular process is that you can do it at any age, because obviously anybody can switch jobs or switch careers at any point. It's no different for a young person. The benefit that young people have is their education. It's the opportunity to launch yourself in a direction in which you want to go. Now, how do you take that into consideration? How do you formulate your life before that so that you kind of know at least a general idea of what's going to happen? All right. So let's start from puberty. And this is a very interesting piece of research that I ran across that William Damon did in a book, if you want to recommend, called The Pathway to Purpose, I believe it is. Mm-hmm. And in it, he says they did some research at Stanford University around the idea of what happens. Obviously, we know when teenagers become or go into puberty, hormones skyrocket, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they're out of control. They're a different human being. We don't know who this is anymore. That kind of thing. What they found out is that if you have first time or major experiences in your life at that point, say, for instance, you have spaghetti for the first time, mm-hmm. and you love it, the experience will stick with you for way longer. If you have broccoli and you hate it, you will not have it for another 2 decades in that particular time frame. The same thing applies to career or vocation. So whatever you are exposed to in puberty as a very positive experience, chances are you're going to stick with that, or interest is going to stick with you for a long period of time. I hate to use this analogy, of course, but it's true. First taste is free if you talk about drug use, because it's the most powerful. So that's what it is. It's the first experience with something that is really, really powerful, and that sticks with you. So that's kind of where we have to start as far as, if we're really starting to make decisions. The first kinds of questions to ask are around those experiences that you have in puberty. Now, from a more scientific standpoint, because obviously that's extremely subjective and you don't know, you can't really calibrate a teenager basically high on hormones, is that a dream job, in my estimation, first off, is not a passion. It's like if I were to ask someone, what's your passion? You must say music or art or theater or football or something like that. But I bet that I could possibly find some part of that industry that you not only disliked, but part of it that you perhaps even hated. Say, for instance, I did this exercise with a football coach, and I asked him the question, "What's your passion?" Football, obviously. All right. Do you like field maintenance? Do you like marketing? Do you like laundry? Because all of that is part of that football entire scene. Yeah. Right. It's football. It's still football. No, I like to coach football. Okay. Now we're going somewhere different. Now we've labeled it down a little bit more. So it's not just one thing. People have to get around this. Your passion is not a one word idea. Mm-hmm. It's actually a combination of 3 things. Number 1, an interest. And interests are always nouns. They're always something that you can look up on the internet. There's something you can read about, talk about, research. They're things that stimulate you intellectually. Okay. So in this particular case, football. Okay. There we go. The second thing you have to have is an ability. And always abilities are verbs, things that you can do. I want to write. I want to design. I want to build. I want to listen. I want to coach, those kinds of things. And then the third thing, well, let me back up just a second. The jobs every job that you have, every job that is available now and probably will ever be available is the combination of an interest and an ability. For instance, math teacher, interest in math, ability to teach it. Football coach, interest in football, ability to coach it. Oncologist, interest in cancer, ability to fix, treat, diagnose. Plumber, interested in fluid logistics, ability to fix or repair or build. These kinds of things. So you can always put these words together and form job descriptions, if you will. Once we have that, then you can go towards and find what I would call an audience for that particular job. So say, for instance, math teacher. Are we talking about elementary school, middle school, high school, college, graduate school? Are we talking about big city, small town, suburb, inner city? Are we talking about affluent socioeconomic group? Are we talking about non-affluent socioeconomic group? Who is the perfect person? Who is the avatar that you are looking for? The perfect customer that you want to work with. Mm-hmm. And so then what you get is a very simple formula, which is I plus A, interest plus ability, in parentheses, plus AU, which is the audience, equals dream job. The I and the A, of course, forming the job, the audience forming the purpose there. So you've got the interest and the ability coming together to form what I would call a passion. That's what you get out of it because it stimulates you intellectually and it drives you physically. And then that is put forward a purpose towards someone else, which is your audience. So you get passion and purpose all in one big final swap. So that's the formula as how I would start with someone in terms of, let's not talk about big picture. Let's talk about very simple things and try to put them together to form an idea of perhaps what you want to do in life. That said, just because you come up with the formula doesn't mean you have one dream job. We could find hundreds that will fit. The question then is narrowing it down and seeing how those things work out. What is required? Do I need to go to college? Do I need to go to grad school? Do I need to go to trade school? Those kinds of things to help kids make those decisions about what happens after high school graduation.
So that wasn't all that tough for you to answer. Come on now. It
only took 6 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I want to unpack some of it because I think it is worth discussing. And again, I'm not a doctor or scientist, so and I've not seen that study, but it makes sense to me that influential kind of puberty time where your experiences it's almost heightened stimulation with every experience that you have, right? So, and that's interesting because what we do in the college guidance environment, I think we don't expose students to enough. I don't think we show them enough of what is a day in the life of XYZ and how can someone matriculate from entry level to executive level and how many executives there are at different organizations and how many pathways there are inside of companies. So they don't see that. They don't have that exposure, which is interesting because it almost to me sounds like we're not starting early enough on the forward thinking of it. Not that you have to identify your career path as you're 14 years old. However, those experiences that stick with you matter. And I can almost see the family where the uncle has made a ton of money and drives the Mercedes and wears the nice suit. And, the mom and dad are middle America, $100,000 earners. And, the kid grows up to be Wall Street because he saw the money and the wealth and the stuff that his uncle had as an exposure component, right? And so that almost leads me to believe, how do you then expand that bubble and that exposure and in a positive way, not in a negative way? Because as you said, like there's a lot of negative exposures that can take you the wrong way too.
Yeah, no, you've got a great point there. One of the things that I've suggested to parents at times is, and this may seem kooky and weird, but it at least gets them out. And that is take your son or daughter on a drive. wherever you live, and start to look at what makes this city, what makes this town work. It needs certain services, it needs certain products, it needs to function in certain ways. It needs, it needs retail, it needs civic organizations, it needs schools, it needs hospitals, it needs all of these different things, and explain to them, in these different fashions, in these different areas, that all of these are required in some respects. At some point, it's great to have a hospital. You may never go in it, hopefully, but it's great to have a hospital, and this is required. This is needed, and to at least expose them to that in and of itself. And I think it's more than simply, I think you're kind of alluding to the fact that we are rather limited in things like shadow days, where you go and you actually experience something. Let's as parents, you can take the horns on, take the bull by the horns on this, and say, let's go out. And more often than not, like you say, the child is going to be attracted to, for the most part, and I say attracted to just because of exposure, those options that they see. Like you said, the rich uncle. In my case, I grew up in a small college town in Tennessee. My dad was a college professor for 45 years. And broadcasting was not something we talked about, around the dinner table. It's interesting for me in the fact that when I grew up, my dad asked me when I was 12 years old, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I wanted to be a sports writer. And the only reason I said I wanted to be a sports writer is because you got to go to the game for free. You would write about the game, and then someone would pay you to write about the game. And my dad asked me a great follow-up question, which is, well, how many sports writers do you read? None. My grandfather had given me a subscription to Sports Illustrated the previous Christmas, and I love Sports Illustrated, but only for the graphics and the pictures. I never read the articles. So that was tough for me. But here's what happened to me later, is that, in fact, I had this experience in college where I was mortified of microphones and cameras. And obviously I've gotten over it. But a friend of mine who was the sports director of the campus radio station said, hey, Bill, we're doing a game on the radio tonight. Do you want to come and do stats for us? And I'm like, sure, just don't put me on the air. And he said, all right, fine, deal, no problem. And we ended up winning that game, and it was a great game. We beat a team that we were not supposed to beat, and the gym was full, and it exploded at the end when we won. And I thought, I want to do what Mark is doing. Mark was the announcer of the game, and I also thought at that particular moment I could do what he was doing better than him. And I remember thinking this because if my dad asked me that question, what do you want to do with your life? And I'd said sportscaster instead of sports writer. Keep in mind, this is about 1985, 1986, still 3 networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. I could probably tell you 20 to 25 sportscasters on all 3 of those networks. I could tell you what sports they were good at. I could tell you what sports they were bad at. I could tell you what events and what moments were my favorites of them as well. It was something I just followed. I'm talking about 12 years old, puberty. There it is. So coming back to your point, I didn't have the exposure necessarily in the environment that I was built in, but because of being able to watch sports on television, I was able to find it that way. And, that was lucky enough that I had to find it in my own home. So many people obviously are not exposed to a career that gets broadcast into their home 24/7. So, but yeah, absolutely. Exposure to options is incredibly important. And like I said, go out and make going around your town, your city, your municipality, or even going to a big city and seeing, things work on a larger scale. The world is bigger than just your neighborhood, and knowing that there's a place for you out here somewhere. Let's try and find out where that is.
I think what's interesting there too is I love the idea of exposure. Just go, and see what potentially maybe piques an interest. And I think the other big takeaway that popped into my head when you were talking about that was, well, what are the kids curious about? What are they asking questions on? And then you should, as a parent, if there's something that they're asking questions, probably because they're curious. It's probably because they are. So dive a little bit deeper. But then as parents, when you get some answers from kids, which I know isn't always possible, I don't know. But it's for parents to ask questions. See, we talk about that all the time in the sales world. And when we talk, like it's the way that you really understand what people want and what they're thinking is by asking questions. And then that's immediately what came to me was, all right, when you're talking to your kids, they're in puberty, have conversations, open up dialogue, but make sure you're asking questions to see what they're thinking about. And then you go to your dad saying, what do you want to do with a follow-up question? And all of a sudden it changed, right? Like it was immediately different. So I definitely think parents with this kind of idea and this formula, like be involved and ask questions, be part of the dialogue and ask questions, I think was my big takeaway there.
And there's one point there, to dovetail off of that, which I think is extremely important there as well, is that you have to remember that kids from the age of 0 to 17 years, 364 days are told no a heck of a lot more than they're told yes. So if you're able to have a conversation and open up that dialogue where you don't say no to something and give them an opportunity to open up about an interest that they've got that you still might be a little bit squeamish about, but they're going somewhere. That's something you need to foster and not necessarily be scared of.
Well, and there's an interesting takeaway on my side from that whole kind of exchange is that, had let's say sports broadcasting wasn't it wasn't of academic esteem that your father was hoping for, right? We'll call it that. But had the questions been asked or the conversations been had, you had 3 networks, 25 broadcasters, and you could basically rattle off the information about that. If you're listening, we know where you're headed. We know what you're passionate about, whether it's passion or not. It's what you are digging into, right? And it's funny because, I've got a 9-year-old son, and for 2 years, and I do trivia with my kids. I always they want to ask questions and prove how smart they are. So I ask questions. And Gavin would be like, Dad, ask me about dinosaurs. Ask me, I'm going to be a paleontologist. And he would, for 2 years, just go on it. Now it's prepubescent, so we're good there. I don't think that's all going to stick. Right. But the very eye-opening parenting thing right there for me in that, pay attention to what they're excited about, what they're chattering about, and what they constantly turn to, especially in those years that matter in that puberty, because you may be able to guide it in a positive light. Not for nothing, Bill, if you had the support and the conversation had been had and it was, if it had gone a different way, would it have taken you 18 years? Who knows? Right. But there is a reality to it.
Well, in my own particular case, it would have taken 18 years anyway, just because of the fact that I believed a myth that was my downfall. Let's put it that way. When you're going into a job situation and a job, especially in an industry that is extremely competitive, you can't do it on your own. You need help. And I was one of those people who was like, yeah, I can do this. I can do this. No, I'm sorry. You can't do it. If you're trying to reach a spot, my quest, and I didn't look at the numbers, and I'm not sure if I would have shied away from it had I known the numbers. But when I made that decision, the number of positions in the country that would have qualified for my dream job was somewhere around 120. That's astronomically difficult. That's harder than getting into Congress.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I had a belief that at least I could do it.
Yeah.
At that particular point. So yeah, I think that, when you look at how the question is formed and obviously listening to what your kids are saying is extremely important and trying to point them, in that direction. One of the points that I would bring up is that when I talk about interests, you're also talking about 2 different kinds of interests. Interests, by definition, are things that get your attention. They don't always have to be positive. So say, for instance, disease, famine, hunger, inequality, global warming, things that turn your head, like you say, things that get your attention, that they talk about. Again, we're talking about something that stimulates you intellectually, that makes you think.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing that we're looking for there. We're not necessarily looking for, designing the biggest building in New York City, or, doing something that has this great platitude there as well.
Well, and that brings me to the direction I was about to go, because I'm trying to pay attention to the details. And one of the hardest parenting things I think this generation has to go through is the electronics and the social medias and the exposure that is, almost infinite in what you can be exposed to. Even the internet, just as a base premise. And, in talking about the mental health issues that exist now, the post-COVID era, and all the stuff that we know is coming. It's not going to be a great. It'll be a period of hard work to climb out of it, right? But if you're in that kind of period of influence in your life where you're exposed to the wrong stuff, or you're, as a parent, you can't manage the exposure, right? You can suffer on that side the same way that it could be the positive exposure that creates the career path. It could be the negative exposure that ruins it. And so I think social media is a very, very touchy subject, and something that, again, in my parent brain, not my entrepreneur or my college knowledge brain, I'm going, ooh, there's another check on the board for don't let it happen, ever. But I'm obviously it'll happen at some point. But like, to me, there's a real issue there in overexposure at influential ages, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to leave that one alone, but we could go on. I think it's pretty obvious, right?
Let me make just one point to that. So if you're in a situation, and again, if you're talking about kids from, the point where they're starting to be exposed to social media to age 18, when of course the reins come off, and they know they do. One thing that I would say is to not always, but to a great degree, keep your kids active outside the home. And not necessarily where there are, cell phones where, where everything is just there by the tip of your fingers. Realize that the need that everyone brings to the world is going to be human. It's not going to be digital. There's still, psychologists can still function online. There's so many different ways that you can impact other people. And remember that finding a place in the world isn't necessarily finding a place online. It's finding a place where you have the opportunity to serve. That's why I talk about audiences as being someone you want to serve, someone you want to help out. That should be the focus. If you're looking in that particular direction, then and solidify your vision on those. Like you say, for instance, in an entrepreneurial aspect, you're looking at a demographic of people that have a common problem or need a common solution. So that's where you're focusing your energy. And eventually, again, as you work through this, where you focus your energy is based on where you focus your attention. Therefore, where you focus your attention will then also should focus on the subject that you're working on.
Thanks everyone for being a part of College Knowledge, powered by Elite Collegiate Planning. Just as an FYI, we are guaranteeing that you will save money on college by working with ECP. This is a guarantee that you will pay less. Book a free consultation at elitecollegiateplanning.com.
Yep. The other, because I kind of look almost at the reverse side, where there is a role of the parent to make sure that what the kids are doing with the internet, with, all the available resources that they have, we have to make sure that we're doing the right things. But also, my God, how much different is it now, thinking about how you're putting it? What interest do you have, right? What audience are you looking? Well, you can, you don't have to go out in the car and drive. There's endless resources that you can find. We talk about our podcast, right? Like, that wasn't around 20 years ago. Like, there is infinite number of resources that can help if, again, parents are there and kids are there to guide.
Engage.
You have an amazing just plethora of knowledge that can be found online. But again, I think part of that is managing it the right way. So when you were kind of saying, it is tough. It scares me to death, just social media and everything with my young kids, but we can use it a good way.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'll give one more point on that line, and that this is because I've got a young one here as well. And one thing that I am going to definitely try and push her to do, with something that I am trying to do as well, is don't be a content consumer, be a content creator, because then you get on the back end of it, and now you get to drive the conversation as opposed to watching everybody else trying to influence you. Make your content, make your mark, start your YouTube channel, talk about the stuff you want to talk about. And then that energy gets focused into serving other people as opposed to you just getting on your phone, scroll. That's it.
Yeah.
And how much time do we lose a day doing that?
No, without question. I call it the idiot box. used to be the TV was the idiot box. Now it's any squared rectangular device with a screen. I want to reflect back on something you said too, because I love the idea that the interest and the ability that you pair, find your audience, and there's your dream job. But this concept where, Joe, how many people have we sat with where, he's going to be a doctor, or an engineer, or he argues so well, he's going to be a lawyer. There's no question about it, And I come back, and I think the distortion is the money, right? I think people are so focused on this occupation's average starting salary is X, so that's what you got to do. And when I come back, and if you find the interest and you have the ability and you create the audience, I don't care if you're selling popsicles, you can be successful. The money will follow. If the purpose is greater than the mission, right? If the purpose is greater than the money, you will be successful in that, right? So I think it's incredible to embrace the interest and figure out what it is that you can do with it, right? I'll use the local dance studio as an example. You had a mom or dad, whoever was the dancer, right? Was in ballet, was in all kinds of stuff, and then decided, hey, I'm going to teach this to other people, and have a thriving business, making a couple $100,000 a year, and they're doing just fine on the success metric level, doing the thing that they're interested in. They have the ability to do, and they have the audience that wants it.
Yeah. Kind of going to that idea of, you were talking about, money being the distortion. So the formula that I have, when you have an interest, you have something that stimulates you intellectually, you have the ability, which is something that drives you physically, and you have the audience, which is something that hopefully fulfills you emotionally, if not spiritually. So you've got those three things. Daniel Pink wrote a great book called Drive. And I read this book after I came up with this formula. And so what he comes up with is there are three things that we do that we're motivated to do intrinsically. In other words, we have no desire to get anything out of the income of the experience. So the first thing that we do is we desire autonomy. We want to think about things the way in which we want to think about them. Now, the example that I always give is the teacher that comes up to you and says, no, don't do it that way, do it this way. Well, your brain is wanting autonomy. It's wanting to think about the thing the way you want to think about it, as opposed to somebody else. So you desire autonomy. The second thing you desire is mastery, like a puzzle. So you solve a puzzle. You're not going to get paid $500 for solving a puzzle. It's you want to solve the thing. And that gives you, of course, the satisfaction of solving it. And then the third thing that we do for no kickback, if you will, is purpose. So a car wreck happens, you stop, you get out, you see if everybody's okay. You're not expecting somebody to pay you to make sure that things are fine. So all three of those things are examples of intrinsic motivation. When you come to the flip side of that, let's say, for instance, that you're in the job hunt, and you're looking at different avenues that you want to go, and you see the money here and the benefits here, and hey, you get a company car, and hey, this is in a city on the coast, and hey, your best friend's going to work here. Those are all extrinsic motivators. In other words, something you're going to get out of the experience that has nothing to do with the work whatsoever. And so the guideline there that I would give people, and this goes to anybody looking for a job, is that if you take a job, normally it's like voting. We vote for someone for one specific reason over anything else, just because they have this position, or maybe they're not the other guy, or whatever. If you take the job for this one reason, don't write the pros and cons out. you're going to take this job for one reason. If that reason is extrinsically motivated, don't take it because you're headed to burnout real fast. If it's intrinsically motivated, if you're inspired by the work that you're going to be doing, the industry that you're going to be in, and the audience that you're serving, that's going to serve you in the long run for longevity. So when people start looking at those kinds of factors when making job choices, watch very closely in terms of what you're really deciding here. If it's because, oh, hey, Mark's my best friend and he lives in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I get to live on the beach. Doesn't matter what the job is.
Yep.
Doesn't matter what the job is at all. Same thing with money, same thing with company cars, same thing with benefits, insurance, so on and so on.
Well, and I've witnessed it. I've had the person take the job and it's doing what they don't want to do, but they're getting paid more to do it. And it can last for a period of time. And, I think one of the issues that we also face in this day and age is burnout is real, period. And burnout is something that kids are exposed to earlier and earlier than they ever have been, with the influence in travel sports and the AP exams and you got to do this and you got to do that. And you got to have 18,000 extracurriculars. Kids are burnt out by the time they're 15 years old now.
Right.
And
not only that, but consider the flip side of that as well. If you hate your job, and you come home and reflect that attitude on your kids, guess what they're going to do?
Yep.
No matter what they do, they will despise it because of what it did to you as a parent. That's what they're going to expect as a kid.
Well, and I also, again, I'm triggered by that puberty thing, and I go, what if you absolutely despise your job? It comes home every night with you when your kid's in his most influential thing, and while the job may not be right for you, the career path is right for the kid, but the kid won't touch it because the parent hated it or had a bad boss or whatever. And a lot of times that line is a tough thing to draw.
I've said it, 3 episodes about how I should have been an accountant. I can now tie it in 3 episodes in a row, going back to this, my dad doing taxes and talking about how much he hated doing it. And that's what I just assumed it was. And lo and behold, you talk to an actual accountant, it talks about what it is. I never pulled back the onion because I was 12, 13 years old. And that was my dad was doing as a side gig, just at home doing taxes for people and
just hating it.
He did it because, hey, it was friends, it was family. But my God.
There's so many different stories like that. Like Jim Carrey tells a great story about his dad, who was a great jazz musician, but he was a banker and he never pursued it.
Mm-hmm.
And that taught Jim to not do that. And that's what he did.
Yeah. So one of the things in kind of talking this through, okay, we've got a great situation. We found that ability. We got the interest. We have the audience. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think a piece of that puzzle also has to then be, well, it's not going to be you graduate or this is how you get that job. I think there has to be a lot of managing expectations, but ultimately, hey, the dream job might be the job that's 2 or 3 jobs ahead. I think there's a lot of kids that feel, I say kids, but new to the job industry, feel like they should get their dream job right off the bat. And I think it's because that expectation hasn't been managed. So is that something you guys address? And hey, this might happen, but it might take 18 years to get there. But this is what you have to do in those 18 years to achieve that. How much is managing expectations and having a solid game plan help with this whole formula?
Right. So the second half of the program is how do you get the job?
Okay.
So in the middle of the program, we'll say, let me back up just a little bit. In the format of what we do, we formulate a matrix. And what that is say, for instance, think of an Excel spreadsheet where you have each, let's say 5 interests across the top. These are things that you can talk about for hours on end and not get bored. That's basically what I call, that's the qualifier. Then down the side, you have a list of abilities, things that you've been told that you do well. Is that actually abilities have to meet 3 criteria. Number 1, obviously you got to want to do it. Number 2, you've got to be able to do it well enough for somebody to pay you. And number 3, you've got to be able to do it for somebody else. So like eating, for instance, doesn't necessarily qualify because you don't really do that unless you're.
I'd be so rich.
You want to taste food for the king to make sure it's not poisonous. That's basically the only place you're going to find that. So what you would do is take the interest, take the ability, put it together, and see if you can form a job with it. Now, you can run into situations where, say, for instance, if your interest is history and your ability is writing, guess what? That's just about every job in the book. Just because you can do the history of anything and you can write about it, congratulations, you can be, almost anything. So we have to, sometimes you got to whittle that down a little bit. But nevertheless, those inner cells get populated as you cross-reference these things. And so you're going to find more and more options with it. Now, we narrow those down through a series of activities, but let's say we get to 2 or 3 that are like really cool that we want to at least look at. So what we'll do is reverse engineer it. Here's the job. Here's the job that will get you in place so that you're qualified for the job. Here's the job that will get you your foot in the door so that you get in the industry. And then behind that, here's the schooling that's required. Here's the internship. Here's the apprenticeship that you need to have. Here's the school you need to go to, that kind of thing. So it's reversed. So now they see it as a series of steps. And that's more manageable than saying, hey, I want to be the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. Got no idea how to do it, kind of thing. So then you at least build that like you said, that game plan.
We got to pause right there. Who would ever want to play for the Dallas Cowboys? All right, we're in Philly and we're going to the Super Bowl.
I got that, and I realized that, and I knew that when I said that. So growing up in Tennessee, we always got the Dallas game when I was growing up. So anyway. But yeah, go Eagles. And so anyway, so you get the game plan, and they get to see, and again, that's part of pulling back the onion, trying to figure out, like, say, for instance, we'll stay on football. If you want to be an NFL head coach, well, then you got to be either an assistant coach or a coordinator or a college head coach at the Division I level to even be considered for that. All right. So now let's go back. Now you got to be an assistant coach. Then you got to be a position coach. Then you've got to, I have a good friend that used to be the offensive. His high watermark was he was the offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears under Dick Duran. This is talking about 15 years ago, at least. He was my middle school basketball coach, and in college, when he was in college, he played at a small D3 school, but eventually went and he managed to figure it out. He climbed the ladder all the way to at least that height, and then became an offensive coordinator for 3 or 4 high-level D1 schools. So, part of that process, again, in narrowing things down to try and get those 1 or 2 or 3 jobs that you want to go to is talk to somebody who's got the job.
Yeah, without question.
Find out, is this really what I want to do? I got very lucky in the fact that my mother went to school with, I don't know if you guys remember this name, Kyle Rote Jr. Kyle Rote was a sportscaster that worked for ABC Sports back in the 80s. Before that, he was a professional soccer player. And if you remember the old TV sports competition called the Superstars way back, and this is okay. So this is basically a competition of athletes from different sports, and they try to figure out who's the best athlete in the world today. Kyle won the first 2 of those competitions. But anyway, he became a sportscaster, worked for ABC for a number of years, but he eventually became a sports agent. And my mother got me an interview with him. And I was 2 years out of college, and he gave me one piece of advice, which I ignored, which was the worst decision I perhaps have ever made. But he said, what's the job that you want? And at that particular moment, I said, I want, at that time, Mike Patrick's job. I want to do Sunday Night Football on ESPN and then do ACC basketball. That's what I wanted to do. And he said, that's attainable. You can do it. You set your mind to it. You can get there. And he gave me that push to do it. But yeah, so like I said, that's that part of, say, for instance, narrowing those ideas down, talking to someone who's got the job, helping you figure out how to reverse engineer, how to get from here to there. And if that talk doesn't inspire you, put it away.
Wrong job.
So there's, you can go from there.
Interesting kind of issue here, right? As an entrepreneur, I constantly talk about begin with the end in mind, right? And that's really what we're doing. We're going to the end goal. When we do retirement planning for families, when we do financial planning for college, when we do admissions planning, it's like we're setting the mark and we're working backwards to get there, right? And it's tough for kids because they don't have the critical knowledge or the critical thinking capability to set that target out. And so it becomes more important that the advisors, the mentors, the people around them have that influence to help guide the conversation. And I know for a lot of students and parents that are out there right now listening, your teenager doesn't really want to talk to you anymore about stuff, right? You got them to a point where they want to spread their wings and they want to start making their own decisions and they want to own it a little bit. And I think it's the idea that you as a parent have to present them others to add influence and others to trust that are giving that advice and expose them that way so that other people can help them get to that. That's not for everybody. Some kids listen to their parents through and through, but I know there's a resistance. There's a that autonomy that you talk about, Bill, is part of that whole parenting thing as well. So, I'd love to talk to the kid that wanted to be an astronaut and became one, you know what I mean? And how did you get there? But at the same time, I think there has to be an engagement at multiple levels. And, our business exists because people appreciate our advice and they trust our advice and we help them do a lot of these things, as do you. Right. So,
I would say to that effect, if you're trying to talk about the astronaut thing, or anybody that's got, an idea in mind, not only to talk to someone who's got the job, which in that particular case is obviously going to be extremely difficult, but talk to educational institutions that produce that kind of person. I mean, go to, Knight Riddle down in Florida has put 9 astronauts out. Purdue has put out more astronauts than anybody, including Neil Armstrong. Go talk to those people. And then you get an idea of, now I need what, because the biggest mistake that you want to make is to have something that you really want to do and then mismanage your education or do something that just causes you to fall off the wayside. I had a student when I was teaching at that private school where we had a rat snake in the biology room that would hiss like nobody's business if anybody got close to it except her. And it would allow her to pick it up, to pet it. And it was great. And that was like, you need to be a veterinarian. Like you're like, she loved animals. This is a great idea. This is a great thing. And she went to college with that idea in mind. Unfortunately, what was not taken into consideration in doing that research is that one of the requirements for being a veterinarian is to take chemistry, and chemistry requires calculus. And she was not a math person. She just barely got the high school requirements so she could get into college. And unfortunately, that dream died at that point because you got to take organic chemistry, which is the hardest course on the planet. And you got to know your math to do it. And unfortunately, that's what happened. So, obviously knowing the path to get to certain things there, you've got to be able, like I said, do your due diligence. Yes. Maybe some people are able to figure out, I wanted to be an NCAA Division I sportscaster. Technically, yeah, it should probably taken me 4, 5, 6 years, maybe less. Again, depending on the school. Some of that depends on the school that you go to, because the school that you go to can then open doors. You can say you might go to Syracuse University. Again, nothing against Syracuse at all, but if you go to Syracuse University, i.e., sportscaster, you're going to be going up against some of the best talent in the country that is going to try and come out of there. That's one of the pieces of advice I gave a young man when he was coming through Campbell University. He had an opportunity to transfer to a very large ACC school that had a very good communications program. And he said, should I transfer? And I said, my best advice to you is this. If you stay here, you'll get opportunity here because you're the only person that does soccer broadcasting for this school. If you go to this other school, you're going to go up against everybody else and you're not going to get opportunity. So he stayed. And long story short, 2 years ago, he broadcasted an NCAA Division I tournament semifinal. That's no slouch at all. And he's doing professional games this year.
Nice.
So yeah. So there's a million different ways to peel the onion. But like you said, being able to be exposed to the world and be exposed to the options that can be attractive to you, that's going to start to open up those doors. And again, not to say that it all is going to happen in puberty. I mean,
right.
It can happen much later. We also know of people that have found success very late in life in an area that they just found interest in.
Yeah.
But that certainly is, something to take into consideration as well.
So I was, my last question today was going to be about how important in part of that game plan and part of the process is the school that you go to. Is it the major that's more important, or is it the school? And it's probably the first time, because we always talk about finding the school that's the right fit. Don't focus on the fame. Right. And you putting it into that with the Syracuse analogy, and it potentially could be harder, even though it's the big fame school. Well, if this is something you really want to do, is that the best pathway, or could there be a better fit? Are you focusing on something so minute that you think is the plan, but if you don't plan it all out, it's not the right way to go? So the question I originally was going to ask was, how important have you seen that the school you go to, it leads to, hey, if you want this type of job, like I've heard, hey, if you want the Supreme Court, it's got to be Ivy League, right? But you hear all the time, it's not always where you graduate from. It's what did you study, right? What is your passion? What is your major? I was just curious if you had a take on that, but then after hearing that, that's an argument I've never heard before, to say, hey, you can limit the competition if you're here. Kind of, the big fish, small ponds concept. It was, I didn't think about it that way which is interesting.
If you take it from that particular perspective, like say I went to a small D1 school in South Carolina, and what happened after my basketball experience was the guy that I was following, Mark, he was a senior. I was a sophomore. He left, he graduated. He recommended me for his job. I got to do every single game there without any competition for the next 2 years. That's an amazing opportunity. And then I was able to make demo tapes and send them on to people and get critiques. And I had a body of work out of that there as well. So I would tend, and again, especially in those areas where what the field you're going into is performance based, I would look at a school that gives you as much opportunity to do what it is that you want to do. Charlie Steiner, who worked for ESPN, had a great point years ago in that he went to college. I can't remember where. And he showed up on the first day of school, plopped his backpack down on the campus radio station and announced, "Get used to me. I'm going to be here a lot." That was his deal. He lived at the radio station. Now he's the voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers. I mean, that's just it. So concentrate on schools, given the opportunity, what you wanted to do, make sure the school, not necessarily in and of itself, but maybe even around the surrounding area, gives you an opportunity to do what you want to do. Not necessarily that your education is confined to the classroom, but what opportunities does it give you around that as well, that you could possibly step into, perhaps easily in my case, and like the guy that I mentored.
Nice. And it's interesting that you bring that up because if you're paying attention to college football right now, the transfer portal is just berserk. And when you think about what those people are doing, right, they got a free ride to go jump to somewhere else, and they're going to get more playing time. They're going to get to perform their craft more than ever before. So you talk about that performance-based thing. If you're into a performance-based environment, you better be able to practice your craft and perform, right?
Yeah, and absolutely along those lines, you're talking about, I think what has happened through the Great Resignation that we've had is that people have figured out the quickest way to get a raise is to change jobs. So yeah, I mean, and then again, you get into the golden handcuffs theory about, money being, your motivation for doing something. And that's, something that I intend to not teach my child. But like you said, that's not the way you want to go necessarily. You want to find something that's going to give you an opportunity. Like I said, with that formula, that's something for me, it would be sports, communication, broadcasting, put that together. You get sports broadcasting. And my audience in that particular case was the parent of the athlete. It motivates you, number one, because you got to get their name right. Otherwise mom and dad are pissed. Number two, you better get the play right, because if they make the game winning score, the game winning play, get the play right. And number three, and I always do this just in my own head, is that I broadcast to 3 old grandparents in a barber shop, and it forces me to enunciate because they can't hear very well.
Yeah.
And that's why I did it. And that was the most fun that I've ever had professionally is being able to do that and being able to bring those games to those people. And that's kind of, again, looking through that formula. If you find a job that stimulates you intellectually, drives you physically, and rewards you emotionally or spiritually, that's a tough cocktail to pass up. It really is.
And I will tell everybody that people pass it up all the time, and they shouldn't. Do. And, the great resignation, as you called it, which I think is a cop out on trying to lane shift to steal a job from someone, but I'll leave that alone.
Sure.
The reality to that is the grass isn't always greener. It just isn't. No. And so you leave somewhere you've been for 20 years and you have influence and people respect you, and all of a sudden you go somewhere else and it's not for you and burn out. Like I think that's a tragic net, but it's also our culture has endorsed it. Right. It's not something that is frowned upon anymore.
There's a keeping up with the Joneses effect there too.
100%. Yep. Without question. Well, so Bill, if people want to understand your program and all that, where do they find you?
Dreamjobfactory.com. Okay. That's the easiest place to find us on the net. And then we also have outlets on Facebook at facebook.com/The Dream Job Factory. And then you can catch me as well on TikTok and on Instagram.
Cool. Love it, man. It's been a great conversation. I think this is something that it's not every time we have a podcast where everybody should listen and hear and know what we're talking about. But this is parenting. This is college bound. This is job placement. This is midlife crisis. This is across the board. And I think the approach is commendable for sure.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure to be here. Like I said, I've been waiting for 2 weeks, looking forward to it, and it met all expectations.
Fantastic, man. Love it. Yeah. Everyone listen, this has been College Knowledge again with Bill Priestley from the Dream Job Factory, and really turning not only your passion at a young age or your passion at a late age into the job you want, but figuring out how to get there and taking it seriously, the pathway that you need to get to that end result you're looking for.
This is great, Bill. Thanks so much.
Yeah, man. Loved it.
Awesome. Thank you.
We want to help. Send your questions to info@collegeknowledge.net. These can be about college, finances, careers, and anything else you have questions on. Thanks for listening to the College Knowledge Podcast with your hosts, Dave Kozak and Joe Kearns. We hope you enjoyed this week's exploration of higher education, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. That's all for this episode. See you next time.